as we go through. So good afternoon and welcome everyone to this session looking at what I think is the really exciting topic of vertical farming. This sort of high-tech approach to crop production has had a lot of attention in the media over the last few years, and investors certainly seem to think there's something in it, judging by the amount of money that's been going into startups in the sector. So today we're going to look at what is vertical farming, what can it do for us now, and talk a bit about where it might go in future and how widely it could be applied. And to help us in this, I'm joined by the three experts you can see around me on your screen. So I'll introduce them, and if you can just all wave when I say your name so everyone know who's who. So in no particular order, Dr. Antony Dodd leads a research team at the world-renowned John Innes Centre, looking at how plants interact with their environment. I know something that they're particularly working on is the interaction with the daily cycle of night and day and how that interacts with sort of the internal clock of plants. Then Dr. Jen Bromley, hi Jen, is the Head of Plant Research and Development at Vertical Futures. It's a London-based startup that's developing vertical farming technology and services. And I think you're already supplying herbs and some other ingredients to over 100 restaurants in London from a facility you've got there. But more exciting things to come, I know, in your plans. And last but not least, Charlie Guy. Hi, Charlie.
Hiya.
Co-founder and chief executive of another vertical farming startup, LettUs, based just outside Bristol. And they're designing modular aeroponic farming systems. We're going to find out what they are shortly, including farms that run in shipping containers, believe it or not. So let's start with the basics. Ant, what is vertical farming?
Thanks for the introduction, Karl. So vertical farming is the cultivation of crops, typically horticultural products, in stacked indoor systems, usually under fairly tightly controlled environmental conditions. So if you imagine a set of shelves with plants growing on them, with those shelves illuminated with artificial lighting, that should give you a picture of what a vertical farm might look like. So often these facilities are based in completely sort of sealed conditions with temperature control and sometimes humidity control. And often the plants are grown in soil-free conditions. So what that means is that they're grown with, for example, hydroponics or aeroponic conditions. And when you take all of this together, what it does is it provides very tight control over the conditions under which the crop is growing, which enables you to, as the farmer, to control many aspects of the growth and development of the plant in the way that you want to ensure that the product is exactly right at the time that it's harvested. It also provides an environment that's free from pest and pathogen pressures. And it also enables crops to be grown in a way that's isolated from the weather conditions. So it provides some resilience to seasonal changes in the environment, or perhaps allows you to grow your crops at latitudes where they couldn't otherwise be grown.
That aspect of being able to control pretty much everything, the whole environment, the lighting, the temperature, the environment it's growing in, the nutrients it has access to, that seems to me to be the essence of what vertical farming does, and what enables you to use that to, I don't know, increase productivity or make the plants more nutritious or taste better, and you reduce the environmental impact. Is that the heart of it? It's about that control of the environment.
So one of the things it does is it allows the control of the environment, but something else it enables you to do is to grow food in places where you wouldn't otherwise be able to grow the food. So this could be in a disused building, or it could, for example, be on a ship, or out the back of a hospital, or under the ground, or in a railway tunnel. So another feature of vertical farms is that they enable places to be brought into food production that wouldn't otherwise be used to produce food. So it has a kind of land use benefit as well.
And your particular, or one thing I think that got you particularly interested in this area in the first place is the relationship between plants and the cycle of night and day, and the ability to control that in a vertical farming environment?
So my research program is largely fundamental research into how plants are adapted to their daily cycles of day and night. So we study essentially the plant's body clock, which is known as the circadian clock in biology terminology. So we study the biological clock, and one of the things that this does is it enables plants to anticipate the daily changes in their environmental conditions. And having a close match between the correct timing of the body clock and the correct timing of the cycles of day and night in the environment is really important for optimal rates of plant growth. Now, if you think about a vertical farm, one of the things you can do in a vertical farm is because you have total control, you can decide when the lights switch on and when the lights switch off. So understanding that relationship between the daily cycles of night and day and how the particular variety of crop that you're growing might respond to those cycles of night and day. We reason, this knowledge will help to improve the performance of certain varieties in vertical farms and also contribute to knowledge around the design and engineering of vertical farms as well.
So you can hear already there's lots of reasons why people are getting excited about this area. Jen, can I bring you in here? Where is this technology being used now?
So Vertical Future operate two vertical farms, and we operate in a old Victorian warehouse. From the warehouse, you can see the Docklands Light Railway, and we're around 10 minutes from London Bridge. So we are very much in the centre of London, which is where you would never normally expect to see a farm. That enables us to be able to supply restaurants who are very local to us. We can literally harvest, and within 20 minutes, having walked there, you can provide fresh produce to the restaurant. It also allows us to take advantage of the local transport network as well, so that we can very much minimise the carbon impact, because agriculture and food delivery actually is one of the biggest carbon emitters in London. And so if you can reduce the food miles in terms of supplying the restaurants and the end consumers, you can have a huge impact on the carbon footprint of your crop.
That's certainly one of the use cases I've seen sort of trumpeted a lot in the media for vertical farming, that allows you to bring crop production right close to where the crops are being consumed into cities. But I think it's in terms of geographical spread, it's already being used in places like the Middle East to allow us to grow crops that you just couldn't grow in that climate because it's too hot and arid.
Absolutely. So the real growth areas for vertical farming have been in areas where traditionally agriculture, outdoor agriculture, so what we would term broadacre agriculture, hasn't been able to take root as well. And that might be because of climate conditions. It might be because of lack of water. So the Middle East is a huge growth area for vertical farming. It's been very, very well adopted in Southeast Asia. So cities like Singapore, they have a 30 by 30 plan where they're looking to produce 30% of their own produce by 2030. So that's a really ambitious target for them, because if you know Singapore, it's a city state. It's on a very small island. They don't have much space for agriculture, and so they are looking to technologies like vertical farming to be able to do that and support their own production.
So that's a good example of where it could really be a transformational technology actually for that society.
Absolutely. And it will also bring the costs of produce down, because the costs of import become so high, so that you can really start to reduce the costs and essentially improve the accessibility of high quality, recently harvested fresh produce to your population.
Charlie, let me turn to you. I wanted you to say a bit about your how your route into this area, because it's quite interesting. You got together with a group of people you knew at university and decided that you were going to set up a business in this area. That's quite an unusual thing to do. Can you tell me a bit about that, how you got into this?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, I founded a business with Jack and Ben, one of whom's a plant scientist and the other an engineer, and my background really is renewable energy as well. So that we came out looking at the problem of food waste and inefficiencies within food supply chains. So things like Jen's already spoken about, being able to supply produce from a much shorter supply chain, reducing some of the inefficiencies in that, reducing imports in certain locations, were sort of the main drivers for us. It's sort of building that link between supply and demand of produce in the same way that's done within energy production. So actually, yeah, I'm the least plant science oriented on the panel today, but yeah, I think my route in was more on the ability to use these very exciting new technologies and innovate and create new ones that can really improve the efficiency of how we grow produce.
That's really interesting, because it seems to me that not just in this field, but in a lot of the exciting areas of application of science and technology now in agriculture, it's disciplines that are coming in that aren't traditionally associated with agriculture: artificial intelligence, data analysis, physics, material science. You typically didn't graduate from a top engineering university and think, I'll go into farming, into agriculture. But actually, that is where some of the most exciting stuff is happening at the moment. Tell me about your why I'm a shipping container. One of the things, I mean, it's not the only thing you're doing, but one of the things you're developing is basically a farm in a shipping container. So tell me about that and why that.
Yeah, so a lot of the people we work with and people that come to us looking for solutions don't have the appropriate buildings to retrofit, and we actually found that many of those that are looking to enter into vertical farming, a lot of these people are traditional farmers, traditional growers that are looking to diversify their existing farms. So not just the urban environment, very much. There's a lot of interest from rural regions as well, especially in the UK, with the pressures that farmers are under. And it's around this sort of scalable unit of farm. So you may have one shipping container, you may have 10 shipping containers. But what they enable you to do is individually control the environment in each chamber, and therefore you can grow different crops in each of those, in different environments, different conditions. You can specifically tune each container as such, so that you can grow a wide variety of produce. So that's one of the reasons. It's all about getting farms out to people as quickly as we can, in a way that gives them a profitable business and a way that enables them to diversify what they're doing in an accessible way. So I guess, shipping containers are used for all sorts of technologies in the world have been packaged up into them, because they're so universally prevalent and provide such a good structure that you can control the environment on. I guess an example is that a lot of the cold chain for fresh produce already runs in climate controlled shipping containers.
And you're focusing on a technology called aeroponics. Now, I think people will probably have heard of hydroponics, sort of using water solutions in water to be the growing medium. What's aeroponics?
Yeah, so the difference between hydroponics and aeroponics, like you say, hydroponics, you grow in a solution and a growing substrate, a growing media, whereas aeroponics, you actually grow within a fine mist. So all of the nutrients are held in that mist, and that's what the roots grow down into, and that effectively enables them to have a much greater access to oxygen and gas exchange, and leads to faster growth rates and effectively the potential to pull another lever in the indoor farming controlled environment agriculture toolbox that enables you to tweak even more elements of how that crop's growing. So that's sort of how we see it. It's another lever to be able to pull that provides that increased oxygenation, enables the plants to feel, I sometimes explain it as like they're in a perfect soil condition, but we've worked with Ant and others on sort of setting the basis for literature for this, because actually it's a very under researched area.
Jen, I don't know if you still got it with you. When I spoke to you the other day, you had an example of the growing medium you use. Can you wave that if you've got it?
I do. So this is just a small piece of growing media. I'm going to sort of hold it closer to the camera. So you can see it's very, very thin. So this is actually the thickest growing media that we use. This is modified wood pulp. So it comes, it's basically, it's kind of like a paper making process. So it's completely clean. Obviously, I wouldn't use this one because I've had my grubby hands all over it. But so it's completely clean. What it does is it holds sufficient water to be able to support the germination of the seed, because when a seed germinates, before the roots can grow through the media, so if the plant will grow up from here, the roots will grow down. What you need to do is you need to be able to sufficiently hydrate that seed during the germination process so that it doesn't dry out, to enable the root to grow through. And then that's when it can access the nutrients either through a hydroponic or an aeroponic method. So at Vertical Future, we've designed our systems so that they can be either hydroponic or aeroponic. So it very much depends on the crop that you're growing, and how you're going to deliver your nutrients, what nutrients you're delivering as to what's the most optimum nutrient delivery method.
Now, obviously, this is inherently a high-tech way of growing things. So there are costs that you have with this method of growing that you wouldn't have by sticking things in the ground, to put it simply. So it's certainly in the early years, it's being applied where there are particular benefits or where the crop is particularly high value. So the extra cost isn't such an issue. Now, I want to come back to something you mentioned, Ant, which was the fact that you can eliminate pathogens and pests and things in the environment. As I understand it, one of the things that allows you to do is use varieties of these plants that maybe you couldn't use out in the field because they would just get eaten because they're not resistant enough to these things. But if you can control the environment, you can use varieties that are very high yield or deliver a particularly nice tasting product or are particularly nutritious for you. Is that the case? Can you tell me a bit about that?
So on the subject of different varieties that you might cultivate in vertical farms, I think that's Jen's area of expertise. So I think she could probably talk about that a little bit more. One of the things that I would probably comment on in this area is that something you probably noticed, or our audience might have noticed, is that the development and the shape of plants varies a lot depending on the environment that they grow under. For example, under the types of light, or whether the plants are growing under shade conditions or not under shade conditions. And in a vertical farm, because you can change and manipulate the environment that the plants are growing under, this gives you the scope to change the conditions to produce a crop that looks like you want it to look, so that it's attractive to the customer, or that has a chemical composition that's the most nutritious or the most flavoursome. Whereas if you're growing crops outside, you're exposed to the vagaries of the weather conditions. You can go a step beyond that with a vertical farm and perhaps expose plants to some stress conditions that they wouldn't normally encounter in the natural environment. And by applying those kinds of conditions, you can naturally, essentially, reprogram the plant so that it changes its flavour or fragrance composition, which enables crops to be really tailored to their requirements. So, as an example, if you're with the cultivation of very high value horticultural products that maybe go to the restaurant business, for example, it could be that the chef is looking for a certain flavour or a certain appearance. And with a vertical farm, it's possible to customise that product so that it suits the needs of the customer.
So prettier plants as well as more nutritious.
Prettier, more nutritious, or perhaps adjust plants so that they produce larger quantities of a particular molecule that makes them more healthy.
Jen, as Ant said, this is an area I know you've been looking at. Can you say a bit more about the scope that vertical farming gives you to do these sort of things?
Yeah, so vertical farming allows you to access what are like germplasm, so like varieties of plants that have fallen out of favour with outdoor agriculture. So as you guys have both alluded to, there's a huge pathogen pressure when you're growing crops outdoors. And so what you can do in a vertical farm, because you don't have that pathogen pressure, you can start looking back towards varieties that maybe outdoor farmers don't like to grow because they are particularly susceptible to pathogens that are found quite prevalently in outdoors. So you can start to look back in history. Those varieties have generally been bred for the resistance and the tolerance to pathogens. And that's normally at a yield or a quality penalty. And so you can go back through the germplasm varieties and start to take what we call more like heirloom or heritage varieties, and you can grow those and get a higher yield. You can get a higher quality. You can get a more nutritious plant. And that's just working entirely with the genetics that's available now. So there's no additional breeding required. So there's a lot of focus at the moment in the industry that vertical farming and controlled environment agriculture, they're sort of seen as new kids on the block, really. They're the new players in agriculture. And a huge breeding effort's going to have to be made towards essentially developing seed varieties that are going to support this area. But really, I don't think that's sort of going to be immediately required, and we can go back through history and we can take varieties that have fallen out of favor because of their pathogen susceptibility and grow those in vertical farms.
As you say, using varieties, there's always that trade-off between often quite a large number of characteristics. So it's really interesting to be able to exploit the control in vertical farming to push those trade-offs in a direction that gives you some other benefits. Sorry, go on. You were going to say. I was going to say
it's amazing the size of what's like genetic drag that comes with disease tolerance and resistance. So if you can eliminate that, then that's brilliant.
So Charlie, what crops are we talking about in the short term? Then maybe let's look at how far this could go. And I'm going to ask the question: will we grow wheat this way one day? I'm very sceptical myself, but I'm interested to hear what you guys think. But where are we now? What sort of crops are the early ones being used in this environment?
Yeah, so the focus, I guess, into the early ventures into vertical farming has been in leafy greens, herbs, microgreens, all of your sort of salad crops. That's in many ways down to, as we've spoken about, the sort of economic realities and also the benefits that you get from supplying these type crops with a much shorter supply chain, supplying them with that increased freshness, improving the flavour, improving the taste, all of those elements that we've spoken about. So that's been a lot of the focus. But really, I guess Let's Grow, we've trialled tomatoes, we've trialled strawberries. We've been doing a fair bit of work on propagation and how vertical farming might fit into the broader production methods that exist. So whether you might propagate in a vertical farm and then transplant into greenhouses or transplant into soil and give plants the best possible start to their life. So there's a pretty broad range that's opening up, but got in many ways the economic cost and the increased energy you need to put into fruiting crops has been a limiting factor to date. But that is continuously improving with the improvements in LED efficiency, improvements in energy efficiency as people learn more and more about the sector and the technology advances. So I guess one area that a few years ago you wouldn't have even thought about growing that we've been doing some work on is around tree propagation. There's huge targets globally around tree planting, and there's lots of problems in terms of tree imports and the global sort of tree width and tree sapling supply chain in terms of losses that you have in that. So there's really interesting avenues if you can clone and propagate trees at home, for example, and have those then planted out locally.
So do you want to have a first stab at talking about where this could go? How much of what we currently grow in soil could eventually be grown in vertical farming? I'm talking about in the UK. I appreciate that already in some of these extreme environments, like in deserts, it might already make sense to do it. But in a place like the UK, how far could this go? It's
very wide open at the moment, and I guess for me, Let's Grow is also working in greenhouse agriculture as well, and the greenhouse and vertical farming systems, when they're tightly controlled, are sort of put next to each other in terms of technologies, and it's all going to come down to the varieties and the ability to grow more efficiently in vertical facilities and using as we've already spoken about different methods, whether that's hydroponics or aeroponics for different crops, that really drives what's possible. So there's a huge amount of learning to do for the industry and academia that will drive this. But I think if you look at most horticultural crops, that what's possible is that the breadth of what's possible is absolutely huge. And it's going to be a very exciting decade for vertical farming in terms of how far into that range of crops we can go.
And do you want to have a stab at putting where you think the limits are on this?
I think currently we're restricted to growing high-value horticultural products in vertical farms because of the energy requirements and the need to produce as many crops as possible over a yearly growing cycle to recoup the cost of the capital investment in the equipment and the staff and the energy. I think that as the technology improves, and as an example, as LED lighting technologies become more and more and more efficient and release less heat into the growing environment and convert a greater proportion of the energy that goes into them into light, it might open up more opportunities because the cost of running the facility will be lower. Furthermore, increased levels of robotics within a vertical farm will reduce the staff costs and therefore increase the scope for growing different kinds of crops. Charlie mentioned an interesting thing there. He was talking about strawberries and tomatoes. And the thing with strawberries and tomatoes is that they need to be pollinated. And so a question that I have for Charlie is how would you manage that within a vertical farm? Would you hand pollinate, or would you release bees into the environment, or do you envisage there being robotic drone pollinators?
Yeah, it's a good question, and one that I guess plays into what light you have available in that facility as well, because when you introduce natural pollinators into vertical farms, they can get quite confused based on some of the work that people have done already in the industry. If you don't have the right lighting profiles there, and natural pollinators get quite lost, it's a bit of a problem. So there's all sorts of very exciting, I guess, very miniaturized drone type pollination with tomatoes. Vibrational pollination is pretty well established in greenhouses as well. So scaling that up is another challenge for the industry.
I've got a picture in my head now of a shipping container full of lost bees. I know you wanted to make a point, Ant, but I just wanted to come to Jen, because something you mentioned has been raised in the questions, and actually in the chat, actually people are doing a really good job of answering the questions as well as asking them there. But one of the questions that came out is to do with sort of frequencies of light and whether you need to use particular frequencies, and does it's not just about the timing and the intensity of light. You do have control over that the spectrum of light you use. So what levers does that give you? Jen, do you want to say something about that?
So we've designed a lighting solution that allows us to have really fine scale levels of control, anywhere all the way from UV through to infrared, or far red, as we like to call it in plant biology. So that allows you to really sort of like tweak the exact spectrum that the plant is getting. So a typical sort of the typical vertical farm, and actually sort of quite sort of well emphasised by my sort of profile picture in the advert for this session, is you would see sort of a very pink looking room, and that's because the early stage LEDs were adapted for vertical farms based on chlorophyll and what chlorophyll does, and it needs red light and blue light, and that's why you get sort of pink colour. But what is really sort of becoming very obvious from more and more work that's coming out of labs like Ant's, is that all of those other wavelengths are also really important to plant development, and particularly to their biochemistry, to their leaf shape, so when they transition to flower. So for example, you're growing edible flowers, you want to get them to flower quicker because you need to sort of essentially turn them to making profit sooner. You want to be able to adjust that so that you can do that, and this way it allows you to have real fine scale control over not just the intensity of light, so that's the amount of light that the plant receives, but also exactly what part of the spectrum it's receiving. And then you can play tunes with the plant's sort of inherent genetics to start activating different parts of the genome dependent on what you want the plant to do. So whether you want it to look different or to taste different, it's completely possible to do just by playing tunes with the light. It
sounds really cool. We're actually out of time, but I think we've got a little bit of leeway, and there's one question I've just seen in the Q&A that intrigues me. I don't know if you've got any comments on this. The question is, can we do this with animals? Can vertical farming be applied to animals? Is that a crazy question?
So I have heard of it happening with animals. I've heard of vertical pig farms. I'm not sure that's something that we would want to get into as a company, but I have heard it done.
Hank, you had your hand.
I wonder if animals that are kept in a vertical farm type of environment would have sufficient welfare standards for their living conditions.
Yeah, I can't see it being a good way to raise. I can't see many animals I can think of that would like to be stacked vertically.
If you consider about
don't know what you're doing with that.
Factory farm is pretty much a vertical chicken farm if we think about welfare. So, yeah.
Well, we could obviously carry on this discussion. It's for a lot longer. It's a fascinating area. We are out of time though, so I'd just like to thank you. Firstly, thank you everyone who listened in. This will be available as a recording afterwards, so people who didn't hear it live or maybe came in and caught part of it can see the whole thing later on. It'll be available on the New Scientist website and on the Farmers Weekly website. Just to point out that I think at least one of you, and you're in one of the virtual rooms, aren't you, demonstrating something at the John Innes Centre's virtual room?
So the John Innes Centre does have a room that's active for the whole day. I personally am not demonstrating anything in there. However, my colleagues are, and there's demonstrations of experiments running, as well as science talks and discussions about how John Innes Centre science is contributing to plant health and human health and a healthier planet.
So I do encourage all of you to drop into the rooms during the day, because there's some really exciting interactive stuff. And rather than just listening to people, you can actually, it's sort of much more interactive. It's much more replicating the experience of stepping onto an exhibition stand and being shown something and talking to people. Finally, thank you to the three excellent panelists. I think have given a really good description of vertical farming, and I've certainly learned something today. I hope our audience has. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.